grab your popcorn, kick back and relax, because it is time for some more Karnage. So, in today's video, guys, we're going to be looking at double smoke landings, in particular, how to do them a little bit more consistently. So, we're going to be looking at a few replays that I've got to show you guys so I can give you guys some tips. But in step-by-step order, I'd have to say pretty much what you do is, I can probably show this pretty good on an operation hit, actually. So we'll show an operation hit here. So we'll wait to sort of get all the troops down. There we go. Okay, so you can see where the troops are coming out here. So what I'm going to want to do, I don't really need to smoke this landing. And of course I'm using tanks, so why would you smoke tanks? But all that stuff aside, right? Let's pretend like this was Zukas and I had like a rocket that was just going to be raining hell on me if I didn't smoke, right? I'd need something to use as a visual guide, so because what you want to do is you want to have the very widest part of your smoke, you want to have that overlapping, sort of like, you want to have it sitting like right where your troops are coming out of their landing crafts. So that way, when you space them out as much as you can cover everything under that smoke really, really easily. So, so in every base, you're going to need a visual example to help you if this is the case. If you don't have one, you can very easily create one. Just deploy one landing craft, and then the moment it deploys, just retreat, and then so that way you don't lose any troops, and then you can watch the replay and you can see where it sits and you can sort of judge everything. You can even use your hero boat, actually, because then even if something does fire, then you don't lose troops. But anyway, in operations, you can see that they're in line with like this really thick line that's above it on the operation hit, on the operation base floor. So if I was going to use something as an example, that's probably what it would be. If you're zoomed out enough when you do it, because everyone's going to have their preference of how far they are zoomed in, and of course you have to time the flare with your last landing craft for like wherever you're going to make your checkpoint. Typically I'd probably make a checkpoint early on just to group them and then go up the base, but some people like to do the long flare straight away. So it's up to you, I suppose, but yeah, you need like a visual example to help you. The second tip is, now that you've got some way of knowing where your troops are going to come out, you need to place your smokes perfectly to sort of cover all 8 landing crafts. Now, I have seen people get the smoke placement perfect enough that it gets the hero as well, but getting that perfect is so dangerous because you're basically taking advantage of, even though the smoke ends in a certain place, they still stay protected under the smoke for like a certain amount. So what you're doing is you're taking advantage of that amount. But getting it that perfect is so hard. It is so hard. And if you're using Zukas and you do it too much, then you've basically ruined your attack. So for that reason, I don't tend to push it that much, but everyone is different, I suppose. Now, if you need something to help you with sort of getting the placement perfect, there's no real way to do that. If you're walking down a base, of course you can use the buildings, because the buildings, as we know, are 3 tiles in width and height. So like your landing crafts, I think your smoke is 4.5 tiles. It's like 9 tiles total, but like where you're pressing, the center of it's going to be 4.5 tiles. So if you go a building and just a tiny little bit more, then you're pretty much spot on. You're pretty much spot on for getting it like next to each other perfectly. But on the beach, you've got nothing to judge it by. So it really comes down to practice. If you need to find somewhere to practice, what I've always done was Dr. T, the tropical version, because the map is just so gigantic, and the early stages like 1 and 2, you have nothing that has range on you on that beach, so you can very freely practice your smoke landings without any like hesitation. The later stages though might have stuff in range that might take a few, so if you don't have endless reserves, it might just be easier to use the first few stages as practice. It's up to you guys. Some people prefer to do NPCs. There's like a few NPCs that are really good for practice because they don't have a lot of range on the beach. Everyone has their own preferences, so it's up to you guys. And really, that's about it. It's just your smoke placement and getting it aligned visually, like where they're going to come out of. There's a few different styles of landings, so this is where our replays are going to come in. We will talk pros and cons and stuff like that, and I'll show you guys a little bit more in depth of how to do this. So the first one is going to be a long flare, which means you can see I'm placing the flare as far away as I possibly can. It doesn't really matter on the placement of this flare as long as it's further away than where you really need to be going. The walking path I intend to take when I deploy these troops is actually in between the machine gun and the rocket. So we're going to use sort of this, not a perfect sort of mindset on where our smokes are going to be placed, but close enough that the center of our second smoke is going to be in line with where we're going to be walking. So you can see that this flare isn't really all that important. So this actually is a really good point to note that if you're using a phone, and you can see that like the widest part of my smoke is in line perfectly here with where my first landing craft is placed. So this is a really good point in time to point out that if you're using a phone, getting a consistent 2-smoke landing is going to be very difficult for you. It's going to be much easier on a tablet. The reason for this is because you've got a bigger screen, and it's just easier to get the placement perfect. On a phone, I struggle with this a lot, so I generally won't even try to do a 2-smoke landing just because I never get them consistent. So, the first thing when you're doing one landing craft one by one is you need to get that deployment flag in line with like the very edge of this smoke. So you can see where I've pressed. I've sort of pressed like almost beyond where my smoke is placed, and that got me the perfect alignment on the edge of this smoke. So I usually go 3 landing crafts, then I press my smoke. So you can see I'm sort of using almost like my thumb and a bit. That's sort of like how I judge it for like distance. And that's just muscle memory for me now. So I went 3 landing crafts, deployed my next smoke, then my next landing crafts. And you can see I mean, that second smoke to go up wasn't the best. And the flares, you know, not really consistent. But my focus here wasn't all that side of stuff. It was literally just getting that 2-smoke landing perfect. So that's how to do that. That's some tips on how to do it, but I don't really like this way of doing a 2-smoke landing. The reason for this is because, as you've seen with that example, that long flare was so far away that when I deploy my last landing craft, what actually winds up happening is, if you're not quick on that next flare, your troops are going to try to walk out of the smoke, and if this happens, you're going to lose troops. Nothing good happens to this, so you got to be really quick on that next flare. So if you have something close to the beach that you can use to group up, that's fine. But what I do more often than not when I try to do this, and you sort of seen that come into play a little bit in that example, is literally just I panicked. I panicked. I tried to press up where I needed to be, thereabouts, so it wasn't even all that accurate. And I pressed up there really quick, and you know, I lost troops to that. My next smoke wasn't very good, wasn't placed very well. Granted, in most operations, you will have something on the beach that you can use to group up with, assuming you don't have bad teammates that destroy them. But yeah, I mean, I made mistakes. So the next one is my favorite, and this is the one that I do more often when I go for a 2-smoke landing. So my flare is actually, we're trying to take the same path in between this machine gun and in between this rocket right up the base. So my flare is positioned for that, and it's going to be in the center, hopefully, of my second smoke. So we'll see how I go there. So again, I'm just using my eye as a visual guide. My first landing craft is placed on the edge of that smoke, so you can see the deployment flag there. I'm pressing on the screen on my last landing craft, so that's how I'm getting each one perfect. You can see in this one, I felt like I just had a bit more room to work with. I felt like that first landing craft, I got to push my luck just a little bit. So I felt like I had time to deploy 4 landing crafts this time instead of 3, and then the second smoke. So I'm deploying them all as I can now. I don't even have to worry about going 1 landing craft at a time at this point. Just because my flare is centered, the first Zookas that walked out of this, pretty much as your first ones walk into the smoke, you can mass press on the screen, just so all your Zookas get into that smoke. Then you're going to flare up, then you press your second smoke. So I waited a little bit too long to put in my last 4 landing crafts. So as you can see, I got Zookas that are about to peak, and this will cost me, but that's pretty much the strategy here. Because your flare is centered, you can just mass press everything, and they're all going to try to walk to that point, and that's when they group, and you can long flare. So you can see I did save it, and I don't think I lost any at that point. And all these trees on the beach were really hurting my grouping. But you can see I got that landing pretty much perfect. I mean, I did mess up the timing a little bit. So I mean, if I long flared, I would have had an issue had I chose to do that. But I mean, if you get that timing on the next 4 good, and you practice that, you can get that long flare perfect every time. So that's my favorite, literally, because with the long flare, as I explained, there's this potential for it to go wrong, and it's bad. It's just bad. With this one, it's a lot safer of an option, I feel like. So this is the very last example of a 2-smoke landing. And this one is going to be dropping both your smokes first. Then you deploy all your landing crafts. I dropped my third just because I didn't want to have to panic. Normally, you won't do this. You'll deploy your 2 first, and then you'll place your third smoke, because you're not wasting any time on that smoke, because you don't want that to be an issue. Then you will flare something close to the beach, because you can see right now my troops are not grouped up, so if I try to flare up, I'm going to have some issues. So that's why this third smoke that I pressed, or rather the first one as I'm walking up, is going to be a problem, because that smoke's going to run out before I get anywhere. And I didn't really have anything to group up with very early, so I mean, this wasn't the best base to use as an example, but I wanted to show you guys that style of landing anyway. The biggest thing with that, we'll see, we'll go through this a lot slower this time. Let's see here. First landing flag. So my first landing flag, I tried to get as close to the center of those 2 smokes as I could. And you can see that the first landing craft here, when they all come down, is right in the center of all of this madness. So some people will tell you, and to be perfectly honest, I don't disagree with this at all. What's his name? Red Arrow. Red Arrow has some really in-depth looks on this topic on his channel, if you guys want to search him up and look that up. But pretty much, when you have a left-facing beach like this, if you place the deployment flag not in the center, but a little bit more to the left, you will have everything aligned just so much better. So you can see that my first landing craft here isn't perfectly on the edge of the smoke like it was when I was doing 1 by 1. That's not a big issue, but it is sort of a little bit. So you want the deployment flag to be on the edge of your first smoke, if you were going to from left to right, if that makes sense. So on this beach, it'd be a little bit more to the left than what it was. On a right-facing beach, and I'll show an example of that. Where's my operation? Okay, life wants to be difficult. That's cool too. Let's see, common door. Okay, this will do. So, common door, you can see I've got a right-facing beach here. Let's see when I get my landing craft down. There we go. So, that'll do me. So, you can see I've got all my landing crafts down now. Although I didn't have to smoke in this, if I was to smoke in this, my deployment flag would be pretty much where it was on that last example that I showed you. Because you want it to be not to the center, but slightly to the right of it. So where I placed it in that example was actually pretty much perfect if it was a right-facing beach. But because it was a left-facing beach, you want your deployment flag just to be a little bit more to the left of where I had it, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure why that's as much of a thing as it is, but if you want to sort of get your smokes perfect, because even though, I mean, all 8 of my landing crafts were under that smoke, what you can actually do is you'll see that your hero was a lot closer to the smoke. So you have potential for your hero to get under the smoke a lot quicker, and it's just it's just good. If you're really, really amazing, and I've never ever been able to pull this off even in practice, but pretty much if you place your smokes just right where they're just far enough apart, you can take advantage of sort of like a brief little gap between the smokes to where your troops are actually still protected and think they're under the smoke. This smoke placement will actually allow you to get your hero landing craft boat under the landing crafts as well, like under the smoke of that. I did see an example of this on Turtle's channel a long time ago, and I remember him saying that on stream, and I was just mind blown. I was like, that's incredible. Like, to be able to pull that sort of a landing off in an operation when you've got all this stuff on you is just amazing. But yeah, I think that's a video, guys. I've shown some pretty cool examples of double smoke landings. Hopefully I've given you guys some information so you can go away from this video and practice double smoke landings and just get a little bit more consistent with them. So I did show 3 different styles of double smoke landings, and which one you do is going to come a lot down to personal preference, because a lot of the time you're going to have stuff on the beach you can use to group up with, and yeah, it's just going to come down to which one you're more comfortable using. So anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. If you have, subscribe and join the Karnage. You'll find so many more videos on my channel that are worth watching. I've got many playlists and stuff like that where you guys can go through. More guides other than this one. I might have in the video description the link to that Red Arrow video, because I know he has a few. So if he has a playlist, I will link in the video description the playlist. Otherwise, you guys will have to search his name up and find that video for yourself, I suppose. But anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.